Hi everyone, welcome to Houseplant Tips and Tricks. My name is Nick, and today we're going to plant up a terrarium. This series is sponsored by repotme.com. Get all of your indoor gardening supplies delivered to your door from one place. Repotme.com has practically anything you need for your orchids, succulents, and houseplants, including handmade potting mixes, planters, fertilizers, and much more. If you already have a decent plant collection in your home, you might be surprised that you already have most of the supplies that you'll need for this project on hand. So what are you going to need? So of course you're going to need a glass vessel to plant directly inside. I am using just this plain old glass fish bowl from the craft store, but you could use something as fancy as you would like. You of course are going to need some plants as well. I have this lovely selection of plants right here, which includes a silver lace fern, a crested bird's nest fern, a mini Syngonium podophyllum, a little goldfish plant, and a tiny little Peperomia. I believe that is a Peperomia Napoli nights, but there are so many varieties and it's very tiny, so my guess is as good as yours. And as far as the other things that you're going to need to put inside of the glass here, I have some soil, I also have some charcoal, horticultural charcoal to be specific. I also have some gravel, as well as some larger stones for decoration, some other decorative rocks, and some bark for top dressing, but we will get all into everything that I have here as it's needed. So to get started with our terrarium, the first thing we are going to do is of course clean our glass. Now I did clean the outside of the glass with standard glass cleaner, but because I'm going to be planting directly on the inside, I just cleaned the inside of the glass since I did use this glass for a prior terrarium with some rubbing alcohol, which might sound intense, but it's something that's used in a lot of insecticidal plant sprays, so it's perfectly safe to use with your houseplants. So I use that on the inside, glass cleaner on the outside, because I get my fingerprints all over the outside and you know I'm going to have to go ahead and clean it after we're done this project today. Now there are a couple different ways that you can attack the beginning of building your terrarium. If you would like, you can skip the beginning steps that I'm going to be doing here and just go immediately in with the soil and just have that as the only medium that's inside your terrarium. However, because this fishbowl is so basic, let's say, I'm going to spruce it up a little bit. So I'm going to first do a bottom layer of stones. So I have this gravel here. I'm using the finer gravel here since I think it's going to look a little bit better on the bottom compared to these larger stones, because these are going to allow soil to seep through easier, and then it's just going to become messy over time. So I'm going to go ahead and just add these stones to my glass here. And now you probably often hear, I know I am a broken record about this, but when you are using a container that doesn't have drainage in the bottom, first of all, it's going to be risky in most situations, but because a terrarium is going to use much less soil and it's going to have more plants going in it, it's going to regulate the moisture inside the terrarium easier than it would if you just had one of these plants, say, inside a cashpo or a planter that does not have a drainage hole in it. So if I'm planting inside of a cashpo directly, which I have done before and I still do every now and again because of aesthetics, what I do is I put just a very small layer of charcoal in the bottom of the planter. Now this is going to allow soil to still be in contact with the bottom of the vessel, which is going to make it in contact with any water that's sitting on the bottom. We don't want water sitting on the bottom of our containers. Even if you use a layer of gravel in the bottom of your cashpo, the water's still going to be sitting down there, and we don't really want that. So in order to avoid that, we are going to do something similar here with this terrarium. So I have my gravel in the bottom here, but what I'm actually going to do is use my spoon, because that is my tool of choice when I am planting up terrariums or doing gardening in general inside my apartment, I will admit. But I'm just going to take my spoon and I'm going to start to kind of make this gravel into a bit of a ring. So I'm going to leave a space in the center of my vessel where you can still see through the bottom. And this is also going to give you more of a visual effect with the stones. So by having them kind of ride up the side of the terrarium here, you're going to see them much more than if I just had them set in the bottom for drainage. So it is going to do you a little bit of a favor aesthetically, which is fantastic. And once I have my gravel layer looking as I like it, I'm just going to take a small spoonful of charcoal here and put it in that little opening that I have in the center there. Today I'm using charcoal from repotme.com, and having this small layer of charcoal is going to once again allow the soil to still be in contact with the bottom of the terrarium, but the charcoal will help keep any water that's sitting down there, if there is any extra, clean and just do its best of keeping this terrarium clean as possible. So now that we have the decorative layer in the bottom of our terrarium finished here, we can go ahead and add our soil medium. So today I'm using the classic Houseplant and Tropical mix by repotme.com, which is really perfect for this terrarium here since it does have some charcoal added, a little bit of perlite, and there's some coconut fiber in here, which is not only going to make this a great contender of a soil for your potted plants, but also for a terrarium like this one here. I'm just going to start off with a small layer just to cover up our decorative layer on the bottom. We're definitely going to want to keep things low in here. I think our soil layer is probably not going to want to be above like the lower third of our terrarium here because we really want to keep everything inside. If I was to fill this up with soil up halfway or 2/3, it would technically just be a glass planter with a bunch of plants coming out the top. But to make this more aesthetically pleasing, we're going to want to do all of the planting inside the lower area so it's as if you're looking inside this glass as if it is replicating a greenhouse, which is kind of what the point of making a terrarium is. So one of my next tips that I have for you guys is to, at least in my opinion, I always think terrariums look better when you work with odd numbers of plants. So I have 5 plants here. I don't think I'm going to be fitting all 5 of these in, so I'll probably be using 3. But my theory behind that is that, I mean, I think this is a common design theory, but if I'm using 4 plants like this right here, that looks really intentional, like it's a square. However, if I'm using 3 plants, I can kind of play with them a little bit more. It looks much more natural. So if you want to go for a much more unintentional, natural look, I would definitely recommend using an odd number of plants. Of course, if you're using like 8 or 10 plants in your terrarium, I don't think you're going to be able to tell. There's probably going to be a lot going on there. But if you're using like 5 or less, let's say, I think it might be a smart idea in terms of the final visual effect to consider using an odd number of plants, as it's just going to make it look a lot better. Trust me. So before we get planting inside, we gotta kind of visualize what we want to have going on here. So what I'm going to do is just take all of my plants out of their pots, and we're gonna make a mess here. From now on, we're going to take as much of the soil off of these plants as we can because we're going to kind of want to flatten out the plants here. So I have my plants, but I'll probably take their roots and kind of flatten them into a pancake per se, kind of stretch them out. And this is just going to help us keep things in the lower section of our terrarium so we don't have to add more soil and raise up the soil level and just make it look less visually appealing. I also prefer to use plants that have finer root systems, let's say. So these ferns and the Peperomia are fantastic options because the roots are just very fine and very easy to manipulate in the way that I'm going to need to. But if you're using like a ZZ plant, for example, if you've ever purchased a ZZ plant and taken it out of its nursery pot and you see how thick and robust those roots are, we're not going to be able to manipulate those roots in the way that I can manipulate these ferns' roots. I don't know how well you guys can see since it's pretty far away, but I'm kind of just lightly tearing at this and just trying to make it as flat as possible. It's probably about as thick as like a hamburger patty right now, and that's what I would like so that I'm able to just set them down flat in the soil. And then we will add a little bit more soil, but not very much on top, just to keep everything in place, and perhaps we'll kind of nestle a few things down in there. Since the way that the rocks are, we do have a little bit more space with soil to go a little bit more deeper in the center, also just from the way that the glass is. But the smaller plants might do a little bit better on the outside, but we might want to consider putting the larger plants closer to the center, not exactly in the center because it's a little bit intentional. We like to go for unintentional with these projects. And as long as you think it looks good, that's really all you need. I'm not going to be judging your terrarium. This little Syngonium here is very closely related to the ZZ plant I was just talking about, and you can see these roots are a little bit more robust, so we might have to play around a little bit to get this to fit inside or raise the soil up a little bit more higher. We might get to be able to kind of manipulate them a little bit more, but they are not going to be able to be manipulated as easily as these very, very fine roots that you can see from this Nematanthus or Goldfish Plant that are just very, very easy to just kind of do whatever we need them to do. So as lush and beautiful as this terrarium would look if I shoved everything inside here, I think it would look a little chaotic. So let's just start placing these inside and see how they would look, just to get an idea. So this fern is coming out the top a little too much. Some of you might like that aesthetic. I'm not against the aesthetic, but I think I might be a little more into looking inside this terrarium and seeing the plants inside. So this fern, if I'm able to get it in there, yeah, I could probably even get it a little bit lower, as you could see if I move this forward, or maybe you can't see. I can't see the monitor, as always. I will try to get it a little bit lower. It's probably sitting an inch higher than I would like it to in the soil, but it actually looks kind of nice. The way this is just like this weird lettucey fern thing just kind of taking up the terrarium. Also, I'm aware that my lights are probably shining on this glass here. I'm so sorry. Trying my best here. But this is kind of a vibe. Honestly, I feel like this terrarium, if I just put this fern in here alone, like this could totally be a look right here and just the way to grow this plant. But that would be not as exciting as what I'm striving for today, so we are going to definitely add at least 2 of these little baby plants in here. So let's just kind of shove this guy over a little bit. Let's use our spoon, push it to the back. Now I'm kind of thinking, because of how green this fern is, we're definitely going to want to include this little Peperomia because it's got a little bit of a blue aspect to it. Also, it sits very low and has a very, very different structure to this fern. Although they both grow in kind of a similar rosette pattern, as you might be able to kind of see, the leaves are completely different, so that won't even read as like a similar structure to most people. And then I'm thinking that this goldfish plant might also be the better bet than this Syngonium, just because it's also very upright in the same way that this fern is very upright and firm. They do have kind of a very similar look there, which, you know, if you were playing with a similar look, could look very nice. I just think that it might distract, and I kind of think that our fern is our focal piece here, so let's just place them inside just to get a little bit of an idea. So this is a very, very rough idea. Obviously, we're going to put much more care into planting them directly inside this terrarium, but this is totally a vibe. I really, really like how glossy the Nematanthus is in comparison to these other 2 plants that, while not dull, just don't have quite as much as that gloss. So it'll really shine with not only that shine alone, but the color that it has that kind of brings a different color palette to the table here. And the Peperomia staying low and being blue in comparison to this green, very, very green fern. I think we might have just found our combo very, very quickly. And these plants here, I will be more than happy to pot up and either find a spot for them in my home or give them away to a friend. If I had another glass, I would absolutely love to plant them up in a little terrarium, but they're just 2 plants. And like I said, that's a no from me. So let's clean up slightly and then we will get back with the planting. So to start off the planting, I'm just gonna make a little divot in the soil where I'm gonna plant my fern. Now I mentioned I want it to be near the center, but not exactly centered. So I'm doing this a bit off center. I know I can't really lift this up without the soil falling over, but you can see I'm kind of working a little bit more towards the back. If I'm turning this towards me and this is the back of the terrarium, I'm turning it this way. I'm kind of working more towards that side of the terrarium. So just to give it a little bit more of that unintentional appeal, as I was saying, I think that's really important when you're planting things like this, to really try to make it look like you didn't just do it yourself. You really want it to look like you just dug up a piece of the earth and put it inside a glass here. That is the end goal for certain. I'm just finding which angle I think my fern is going to look best. If you look at it kind of this way, it's got kind of this back side here where this might do best up against the glass, while this side is kind of the one that's kind of beckoning towards the front of the glass. So I think I'm going to plant it that way. So I'm going to just try to keep this as flat as possible and get that in there. And that looks much, much better when it's now like an inch lower than it was before. As you can see, it's like actually inside the glass completely now. I'm gonna take my spoon, I'm gonna push it back a little bit more. I think that's where I would like it. And then I'm just gonna kind of brush this soil back. I will be adding a little bit more soil on top of this by the end, but not too much. Like I said, I'm kind of happy with where the soil level is, but just to keep everything in place, of course, we're gonna have to add a little bit more on top. And just to keep this in the little way that we're going, I'm gonna put this guy in first. It probably would have been smarter for me to have put in this smaller plant, by the way, because now I'm going to be kind of working around this. But I really did want to find out where this focal piece is going to be going before I put in my smaller one. So there's 2 ways you can take it. You can take it the harder way to do it, which I'm kind of doing it, or you can do it the easier way. But you will really have to plan ahead if you are going to do it the easier way, which you probably should be doing it the easier way. Who am I kidding? But I'm going to make another little pocket right here by the front, a little bit closer to the front than I'm gonna do my goldfish plant, just because not only is this Peperomia so small, but it's got a lot of character and I really want you to be able to see it. Just nestle it down on in there. Move a little bit of the soil around it. And the good thing about terrariums too is you can be kind of a little less aggressive. When I am planting up a plant, I am getting in there on all the edges and pushing the soil down, but that's because I'm often taking these over to the sink and watering them or putting them in the shower and using my watering can, and it's just going to get soil everywhere and it's going to be a lot of water going into that container. But because these are going to be kind of a set and forget kind of thing, and I'm just going to water them with my spray bottle very gently, you don't need to worry about kind of knocking things over as the way you would with knocking over a plant inside of a planter. So we have our little guy in the front here, kind of in this little gap between these leaves. And then we have this Nematanthus. I think we're going to kind of just do it. So it goes very upright, as you can see, but I'm going to kind of lay it down a little bit so that as these vines get longer, they're not just going to topple over and then move, but they'll kind of toppled over already. Not completely, because I'd be kind of messing with the roots a little too much if I do it completely over, but we're going to give it a little bit of an angle, almost so it looks as if it's going towards the glass or towards the person who is looking at the terrarium. And as I was mentioning with how if you're using a larger plant, you might want to consider putting that in last just because you're going to be working around it. I also am considering that this bird's nest fern is very hardy and tough, and it's not going to just break if I kind of move a leaf around. There are definitely some plants that are going to be a little bit more ginger that you will not want to just be reaching in around, and you might snap a couple leaves here and there, but 0% of me is worried about this with this bird's nest fern. I'm going to take a little bit of soil just to add on top of here. And this will be the beginning of me adding in just a little bit more soil. And I'm just taking my spoon and pressing it down, but not too much. Like I said, the roots are going to settle in. Not going to be using too much water or aggression with this container here. So I can be a little bit more lackadaisical, let's say, with the way that I am getting this inside the soil. And I am really happy with the way that this is looking. Just going to dust the leaves a little bit while all the soil is still dry, because once we get water in there, it's going to become a wet, pasty mess. So you definitely want to work with it dry as much as you possibly can. I guess that could be another one of my tips here. Don't water your terrarium till the very end, or it's just going to become very messy. Trust. But now is the part where we get to just kind of decorate a little bit. So I'm going to actually keep this terrarium pretty minimalistic, believe it or not, because it doesn't really represent my personality. There are plenty of different things you can do when you are starting to decorate your terrarium. You can get a bunch of moss and add a whole layer of moss here. You can use some stones. I have these stones right here, which I'm not positive I'm going to use. I also have these more decorative rocks and minerals, let's say. When I was 10 years old, I was one of those kids who like to collect rocks and minerals, so all of the little rocks and gems that I have in my plants around the home are from when I was a child, which is kind of adorable, but I'm not sure if I'm going to have a place for them inside this terrarium. But what I think I'm going to do, because these plants have such wonderfully different colors, to kind of accentuate them a little bit, instead of using moss or anything like that, I'm going to use just some bark here. So I have this Monterey bark from repotme.com, and this is something that I would often mix into my soils if I'm planting per se like a Hoya or an Arrow or something that might like a little bit more of a barky mixture. But today I'm going to use it as the top dressing on this terrarium because it's just such a fine, nice looking bark. I think it's going to give a real woodlandsy look to cover up the soil. My last tip for this video would to be, when you are planting a terrarium, cover up every last inch of that surface soil. The terrariums that don't look that good, in my opinion, are the ones that have some soil showing. Like I said, we want this to look like we just kind of dug it up out of the woods and has like a lot of things going on there. So we don't want a second of this terrarium to be boring at all, let's say. So just this plain, simple way to accomplish this in this case is going to be to just do a thin, probably like a centimeter or thinner layer of this bark on top of this soil layer here. This is an excellent way to really allow all of these different plants to shine. I'm really, really loving the way this is looking, and I just did the front section here. I made my way all around the back, but it's looking very, very put together in my opinion. But more importantly, because it has a very natural look to it, I think it's giving this even more of an unintentional appearance, which of course I really enjoy. This Monterey bark really gives this terrarium such a clean look, I will say. I could even see myself using this around my home and some of my planters if I see their level of soil too clearly from where I'm sitting and I want it to look a little bit more nicer and give you that kind of like a woodlandy vibe. This is definitely an option for me. I will definitely be keeping that in mind. So it's looking pretty good. We could do a little bit more touches if we would like. Like for example, behind the fern here, there is like this inch or two of space that is just a little, it's a lot. It's a lot. So I'm thinking maybe we'll just like throw a stone or two. I got one like medium sized one there. Maybe I'll grab one that's like a little bit of a different color and got a little bit of a different height and just kind of place it in there. We'll do one more because we like odd numbers. Just little things like that that can kind of just make things look a little bit more intentional. Even we could even just throw a couple more in there just at random spots. Like I could put one in the front here by the Peperomia. Like these little just boring old little pebbles kind of really just add something. They add a nice little touch, I will say. I do have my little crystal here that I could consider putting in as well to kind of tuck it in the space back here just to kind of give it a little bit of that fairy woodlandy vibe, especially if you're using a terrarium with moss, kind of hiding the little gemstones in there in the moss really does give it quite a nice look. But I might just throw a couple more of these rocks in here and there, throw like one or two little tiny ones in as well, kind of where in the places where you would least expect it. But this is looking fantastic, such a simple, easy terrarium. Things that I had mostly around my home, other things that were available on repotme.com, and it's really just looking fantastic. I don't know if I'm going to keep this terrarium or give it to one of my friends. I don't have a really fantastic space for it, but I picked some really easy to care for plants so that they just give it a quick spritz with a spray bottle like once every week or two. It is going to look fantastic. So I would go ahead and water this on camera, but it's really not going to change the appearance at all. If the terrarium is super dirty on the inside, you can go ahead and spray around the inside here to kind of clean it off, but I did a decent job keeping it clean, so I'm not going to bother with that. But I'll go ahead when I'm finished filming and give this just a very slight spray with my spray bottle just to give it a very, very light watering. And you can kind of see on the sides if the water is trickling down to the bottom and kind of pooling up in that little small layer around the edges where the rocks are, but they will get sucked up by the soil on the inside, which is the whole point of doing that in the first place. So it's just going to take care of itself and look fantastic. And if maybe one of these plants doesn't survive, I can just pull it out and insert a new plant there. Or sometimes I just take a fancy rock and I cover up the hole where the plant was, and I call it a day. So that's it for today's terrarium building video. Thank you guys so much for joining me. Thank you to repotme.com for sponsoring today's video. As always, I will keep the link to their website as well as their products that I used in today's video. So thank you again for joining me. If you don't already, follow me on Instagram at phillyfoliage, subscribe to my channel, and I will see you guys in my next video. Have a great day.